Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human researched and written material. So I was thinking about survival guides today.
Oh, yeah, like wilderness survival manuals, Bear Grylls kind of stuff.
Exactly, yeah. But imagine writing a survival guide not for a freezing forest or, being stranded on a desert island, but for the day you win the lottery.
Oh, wow. Okay, that is a completely different kind of survival.
Right, because historically and even statistically today, sudden prosperity ruins way more lives than sudden poverty.
That is so true. We always assume survival manuals are only for hitting rock bottom.
But the ancient text we're exploring today completely flips that expectation. We are doing a deep dive into Deuteronomy, specifically chapters 5 through 11.
And it really is a fascinating section of the text.
It is, because when you read through the historical commentary, the realization just hits you hard. This isn't a survival guide for the wilderness. It's a survival guide for massive, unprecedented success.
Which is, honestly, an incredibly precarious position for any human being to be in, let alone an entire civilization.
Yeah, I'd imagine the pressure is astronomical.
Oh, absolutely. We have to look at the demographic reality of the audience here. You have this massive population, the Israelites, who have just spent 40 years in a harsh, unforgiving wilderness.
40 years of basically having nothing.
Exactly. It was essentially a multi-generational sensory deprivation tank. And now they are standing right on the edge of the promised land.
They're staring at a completely new economic and social reality.
Yes, a total paradigm shift.
Yeah.
They're about to inherit cities they didn't have to build, vineyards they didn't plant, and just massive raw resource wealth.
So Moses is basically delivering his final keynote address here.
His manifesto, yeah, to a people who are about to get literally everything they've ever wanted. And he is looking at them and warning them in very stark terms how to survive prosperity without completely self-destructing.
That is such a modern problem, too. And to give them the tools to survive that abundance, Moses doesn't just start with, a list of agricultural policies or tax codes.
No, he goes much deeper than that.
Right. He starts by anchoring them in a shared, terrifying memory. In chapter 5, before he details the what of their new lives, he establishes the why.
And he does that by dragging their minds right back to Mount Horeb, which is also known as Sinai.
That's where the foundational rules of the covenant, the Ten Commandments, were first delivered, right?
Exactly. And since his audience knows the broad strokes of the Sinai story, we don't really need to summarize all the lightning and the smoke here.
No, let's look at the psychological nuance of their reaction instead, because the text describes this overwhelming display of power, a voice coming out of a consuming fire and thick darkness.
It's terrifying imagery.
It really is. And the people's reaction wasn't, spiritual enlightenment. It was sheer, unadulterated terror. They begged Moses to step in as a buffer.
They absolutely did. They explicitly say, "This great fire will consume us. You go near and hear all that the Lord our God shall say."
They wanted a middleman.
Right. And analyzing this through the lens of commentator Matthew Henry yields a really brilliant insight here. Henry points out that the people were pleading for a daysman.
A daysman? Wait, what exactly does that mean in this context?
It's an ancient term for an ultimate mediator, someone who could stand in the gap between frail humanity and absolute unshielded divinity.
Okay, that makes sense.
But the twist in the narrative, the part that really defies our modern expectations of how a deity should act, is that God doesn't rebuke them for their fear.
Wait, really?
Yeah, God actually praises it. The text records the divine response as, "Oh, that there was such a heart in them."
See, that feels completely counterintuitive to me.
How so?
Well, in most modern spiritual frameworks, we constantly equate fear with a lack of faith, right? We're always told to cast out fear, be bold.
Right.
So why would the ultimate creator praise a population for being terrified to draw near?
Well, because it wasn't an irrational phobia. It was an entirely accurate assessment of their own structural integrity.
Oh, I see.
Henry notes that this fear demonstrated a profound consciousness of their own flaws. They recognized the massive, unbridgeable gap between their human imperfection and the consuming purity of the absolute.
Because standing unshielded in front of a consuming fire when you are made of combustible material isn't faith.
Exactly. It's suicide.
Wow. That's a powerful way to look at it.
The terrors of Sinai had done their exact intended work. They had awakened a deep existential consciousness of the need for grace. They realized they required a mediator just to survive the relationship.
So Moses recounting this isn't just a trip down memory lane for them.
Not at all.
He is reestablishing the absolute baseline of reality. Before they get the land and the wealth, they have to remember that their core identity is a people who only exist because of a mediated grace.
That's spot on. And that identity fundamentally alters how they're supposed to interact with the laws he's about to recite to them.
Like the repetition of the 10 Commandments in Deuteronomy 5.
Yes, perfectly.
Because it's not just a dry legal recitation. There is a massive seismic shift in the text, specifically regarding the Sabbath.
Oh, this is one of my favorite details.
Right. In the original Exodus account, the justification for the Sabbath is cosmological. It points back to the creation of the world.
God rested on the seventh day, so you rest.
Exactly. But here, standing on the edge of a brand new economy, Moses completely changes the rationale.
The shift is so profound. Moses says, "Remember that you were a servant in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out of there by a mighty hand and by an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day."
So the focus moves entirely from creation to liberation.
Right. The commentator Albert Barnes notes that the deliverance from bondage is now presented as the primary driving motive for the Sabbath. It ceases to be merely a reflection of the creation week.
It becomes a direct, ongoing mechanism of liberation. Let's translate the mechanics of that into the 21st century for a second, because this is honestly the original anti-hustle culture manifesto.
I love that framing. Anti-hustle culture.
Well, think about it. In Egypt, they were slaves. And the defining characteristic of a slave is that their human value is entirely tethered to their economic output.
You are what you produce.
Exactly. A slave doesn't own their time, so a slave never rests. By Moses tying the Sabbath directly to the Exodus, he is installing a weekly structural safeguard against the Egyptian mindset.
He's basically telling them, and by extension you and me today, that if you do not stop producing, you will inevitably revert to the psychology of a slave.
Yes. And that psychological reversion doesn't even require a literal pharaoh holding a whip.
Oh, definitely not. You can be a slave to your own ambition.
Oh.
Or a slave to the algorithmic demands of the modern gig economy.
Or a slave to your smartphone, checking emails at midnight on a Saturday.
Exactly. The Sabbath requirement in this text is radical because it wasn't just for the rich property owner to take a day off.
Right, it protected everybody.
It explicitly mandated rest for the servants, the foreigners living among them, and even the livestock. It was a complete systemic shutdown of the machinery of production.
It's a weekly declaration of independence. It forces the individual to realize that their worth exists completely independently of what they can manufacture, sell, or achieve in a given day.
It's a forced decoupling of identity from utility.
Which we desperately need today. But right after this, in chapter 6, Moses introduces a paradox that I think trips up almost everyone who reads this text deeply.
You're talking about the Shema.
Yes. We get the famous Shema, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." And it is immediately followed by this ultimate command, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might."
Right.
But wait, we just established that God praised them for their terror at Sinai. He praised them for backing away from the consuming fire.
Yeah, the awe of his majesty.
But now Moses is demanding total, unreserved, comprehensive love. I mean, if I'm terrified of a consuming fire, I cannot genuinely love it.
It seems like a massive contradiction.
Totally. I can obey it out of self-preservation, sure, but love requires a drawing near. So how do these two concepts even coexist in the same psychological space?
That is the central paradox of ancient wisdom literature, without a doubt. To understand it, we really have to strip away our modern romanticized definition of life.
Like the Hollywood version.
Right. And we also have to strip away our horror movie definition of fear. In this ancient context, fear is not about cowering in a corner anticipating punishment.
Okay, so what is it?
Fear is the awe of infinite majesty. Think of that profound, almost paralyzing respect you feel when standing at the edge of a violently erupting volcano. Or when you're staring into one of those deep field images of a billion galaxies.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that feeling of just being incredibly small.
Exactly. It's the recognition of an absolute power that is entirely outside of your control. You simply cannot deeply revere what you do not hold in awe.
Okay, so the fear is the awe of the raw power. But where does the love come in?
The love is the human response to the direction of that power.
The direction.
Yeah, the consuming fire didn't annihilate them. It actively chose to intervene in human history to rescue them from the brutality of Egyptian slavery.
Right.
And then it invited them into a covenant.
So it's power used for rescue, not destruction.
Right. Love in the Shema is not just a warm, sentimental feeling. It is a total alignment of the intellect, the will, and all your vital energies in response to ultimate goodness.
You fear the majesty, but you love the character of the majesty.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
Yes. It is total self-surrender to a reality that is both terrifyingly infinite and intimately rescuing.
And Moses clearly knows that human beings are absolutely terrible at maintaining that level of cognitive and spiritual alignment.
Oh, we suffer from constant drift as human nature.
So he institutes what we could maybe call architectural cognitive behavioral therapy.
I like that.
Yeah. Because in chapter 6, he commands them to take these massive abstract truths and literally bind them on their hands, put them as frontlets between their eyes, and write them on the doorposts of their houses.
Yes. Barnes details how this literal application birthed the Jewish tradition of the mezuzah.
The little case on the doorframe, right?
Exactly. The small case containing these specific verses affixed to the door jamb. And it is a brilliant psychological intervention.
Because it places the truth right at the boundary.
Right at the exact physical boundary between the private sanctuary of the home and the chaotic competing values of the public world.
So every time you leave your house, you have to pass it.
Every single time an individual crosses that threshold, they reach out and touch the mezuzah. It is a tactile daily disruption. It forces a moment of reorientation before you step out into the marketplace where 100 different voices are going to try and tell you what your ultimate value should be.
That is way beyond just, curating a digital feed or putting an inspirational quote on your phone's lock screen.
Oh, absolutely.
It's embedding your ultimate allegiance into the very architecture of your daily routine. And Moses places the heaviest burden of this integration squarely on the family unit.
He really zeroes in on the parents.
Yeah, he commands parents to teach these truths diligently to their children. He says to talk about them when sitting in the house, walking by the way, lying down, and rising up.
Matthew Henry's linguistic analysis of the Hebrew word, translated as teach diligently, is incredibly vital here.
What does Henry say about it?
He notes that the root word implies whetting or sharpening,
Oh.
like taking a literal blade to a whetstone.
Oh, wow. So it's an active, repetitive friction.
Exactly. You don't just hand a child a static rule and say, here, memorize this. You hone the truth into their minds. You turn the concept over and over in every possible context.
When you wake up, when you walk, when you eat.
Right. It requires an active, relentless integration of wisdom into the mundane, everyday rhythms of life.
Because if you don't actively sharpen those truths into your own mind and the minds of the next generation, the ambient culture will gladly use its own whetstone on you.
It absolutely will. The culture is always sharpening its own narratives.
So think about the doorway of your own house for a second. When you cross that threshold tomorrow morning, heading into your commute or your workspace, what is the core truth that is framing your reality?
It's a great question to ask yourself.
Is it an intentional truth you've anchored yourself to? Or are you just automatically absorbing the anxiety of the morning news cycle?
And that physical boundary at the doorpost is about to be tested in a way they have never, ever experienced.
Because the economy outside that door is fundamentally changing for them.
Drastically. Which brings us right into the profound warnings of chapter 8.
Right. Moses has laid out all the core loyalties, and now he predicts, with devastating sociological accuracy, exactly what will happen when they actually achieve the prosperity he's promising them.
He basically diagnoses the onset of acute spiritual amnesia.
Spiritual amnesia, that's exactly what it is. And the contrast he sets up is just stark. He reminds them of the mechanics of the last 40 years.
The wilderness.
The wilderness was an environment of absolute, unavoidable dependence. They couldn't farm, they couldn't build infrastructure.
Barnes notes the incredible detail in the text, that their clothes didn't wear out and their feet didn't swell. Their entire existence was maintained by a daily, miraculous provision of manna.
And we shouldn't just gloss over the manna as some kind of ancient magic bread.
No, it's so much more than that.
Think about the psychological curriculum of manna. You are entirely stripped of your ability to secure your own future. You cannot hoard it.
Right. It rots if you keep it overnight.
You are forced every single morning to wake up and trust that the universe will provide the exact caloric intake you need for that specific day.
It was a daily rewiring of the basal ganglia.
It had to be exhausting.
Oh, definitely. And Moses explicitly states the pedagogical purpose of this deprivation in verse 3.
What does he say?
He says, God humbled them and allowed them to hunger, and then fed them with this unknown substance to teach them that man does not live by bread only, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of the Lord.
So the physical deprivation was an intentional lesson.
Completely. The wilderness wasn't an accident of history. It wasn't just a mere punishment. It was a highly curated, forced curriculum in radical vulnerability.
God essentially removed the normal earthly channels of cause and effect sustenance.
Yes, to prove that the ultimate source of life operates through nature, but is not bound by it.
And then you have the whiplash.
Total whiplash.
They are about to step out of that forced vulnerability right into Canaan. Moses describes a land of brooks, of water, of wheat, barley, vines, fig trees, and pomegranates.
That explosion of agriculture.
But it's not just agriculture. He points out stones that are iron and hills where you can dig copper.
Right. This is the raw material for industry, for weaponry, for massive resource control.
They are transitioning overnight from zero economic agency to total resource dominance.
Which triggers the greatest danger Moses foresees. Right in the very middle of this soaring description of abundance, he just drops the hammer.
The warning.
Yes. He says, when you have eaten and are full, when you have built fine houses and live in them, when your herds and your silver and gold multiply.
Beware.
Lest your heart be lifted up.
Lest your heart be lifted up and you forget the Lord your God. And you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand has gotten me this wealth.
The illusion of the self-made individual.
There it is.
It is the most pervasive disease of the human ego, and it is incredibly relevant to us today.
Oh, maybe more now than ever.
Right. When we secure the promotion, when the startup goes public, when we finally buy the comfortable house and build a secure life, the absolute default setting of the human brain is to rewrite history.
We love to rewrite our own history.
We look at the spreadsheet, we look at the bank account, and we tell ourselves a story. We say, look at what my hustle, my intellect, and my late-night grinding built.
Henry's commentary captures the psychology of this perfectly. He writes that when the estate rises, the mind is incredibly apt to rise with it in self-conceit and self-confidence.
We start believing our own press. Exactly. The lethal danger of prosperity is that it creates a closed-loop illusion of self-sufficiency. We start, as the ancient prophets would say, sacrificing to our own net.
Sacrificing to our own net. Wow.
Yeah, we attribute the massive catch purely to our own skill in weaving the twine. We completely forget the unseen currents, the schooling of the fish, and the oxygen in our lungs that allowed us to cast the net in the first place.
That's such a vivid image, but Moses isn't anti-work here, is he?
No, not at all. He actually states later in the very same chapter, it is he that gives you power to get wealth.
Right. So the cognitive ability, the physical energy, this circumstantial opportunity to even do the work, those are the unearned gifts.
Exactly. The fatal error is severing the outcome from its ultimate source and claiming the success entirely as your own merit.
We forget the manna of our own lives.
We do.
We conveniently edit out all the unearned advantages of our birth, the lucky breaks that defied statistical probability, the mentors who opened doors we couldn't unlock ourselves.
The baseline reality that the very synapses firing in our brains are hardware we did not design.
Yes. So how does Moses combat this? Because he doesn't just tell them, hey, be humble. That never works.
No, telling humans to just be humble is pretty useless. He institutes a highly specific, counterintuitive mechanism.
Why is that?
He says, when you have eaten and are full, then you shall bless the Lord your God for the good land which he has given you.
So it's the discipline of gratitude right at the peak of satiety.
Yes. This is often referred to in the tradition as the blessing after meat. Think about human nature for a second. It is purely instinctive to pray when we are starving.
Oh, sure. Desperation organically produces a cry for help. Anyone will pray when they're terrified.
Right. But Moses commands them to pause when they are totally full, when the biological drive for sustenance is completely satisfied, when they are entirely comfortable and deliberately attribute that fullness to an external grace.
That is a profound neurological intervention.
It forces a break in the ego's narrative.
So the practice for you, the listener, is this. The next time you experience a moment of total, undeniable contentment, maybe you just finished an incredible meal, or you received a stellar performance review, or you're simply sitting in a warm house while a storm rages outside.
Don't just let the moment wash over you and move on to the next task.
Exactly. Stop. Actively, verbally acknowledge that this fullness is a gift. Forcing gratitude when you feel the least vulnerable is the ultimate antidote to the arrogance of the ego.
And Moses knows he has to dismantle that arrogance on multiple fronts. because if Chapter 8 is a warning against taking credit for our material success, Chapter 9 aggressively warns against a much more insidious trap.
Taking credit for our moral standing.
Precisely. Material pride makes you arrogant, sure, but moral pride, that makes you a tyrant.
And this is where Moses delivers what honestly has to be one of the worst locker room pep talks in military history.
Oh, it's brutal.
He is prepping them to cross the Jordan River and face heavily fortified cities and nations that are militarily superior. But instead of pumping them up like a normal coach, he essentially insults them.
He really tears them down.
He tells them repeatedly, "Do not say in your heart, for my righteousness the Lord has brought me in to possess this land." He hammers it home, not for your righteousness or for the uprightness of your heart.
And then comes the crushing blow.
Yeah. For you are a stiff-necked people. I mean, I have to step into the shoes of a military commander here. Why on earth is Moses deliberately destroying the self-esteem and confidence of his own army right before an existential conflict?
Because if they win this conflict believing they are morally superior, the resulting civilization will be a nightmare.
Wow. Okay, explain that.
Moses knows the immediate temptation after a victory against these Canaanite nations will be to construct a narrative of moral exceptionalism. They'll say, we won because we are the good guys. God chose us because we are inherently better, cleaner, and more righteous than the people we defeated.
The ultimate holier-than-thou complex.
Exactly. And Moses has to violently deconstruct that narrative before the first arrow is even fired. He tells them point blank that the divine mechanism at work here is twofold.
Okay, what are the two parts?
God is driving out these nations because of their extreme wickedness, but he is not bringing Israel in because of Israel's righteousness.
So it's not a reward for good behavior.
Not at all. They are receiving the land purely to fulfill a historical promise made to their ancestors.
And to ensure they can't possibly argue with his assessment of their character, Moses pulls out the ultimate historical receipt.
The golden calf.
He recounts in agonizing detail their greatest, most embarrassing societal failure, the golden calf at Horeb. And let's just look at the sheer speed of that betrayal for a second.
It's dizzying how fast it happens.
They had just experienced the terrifying reality of Sinai. Moses goes up the mountain to receive the physical tablets of the covenant, and within 40 days, the population just panics.
They demand a visual, manageable deity?
Right, they melt down the gold they brought from Egypt and regress instantly to an Egyptian paradigm, worshiping a metal cow.
It is a stunning, almost unbelievable collapse of the covenant before the ink is even dry.
Literally before Moses even gets back down the hill.
Right. And Henry's commentary provides crucial, terrifying details about the political and spiritual fallout of this moment. Moses reminds this new generation that the divine anger was so intense that God actually proposed wiping out the entire nation instantly.
Just starting over completely.
Yes, starting a new lineage solely through Moses. Even Aaron, the high priest, and Moses' own brother, who had capitulated to the mob and fashioned the calf, was marked for destruction. The entire project was moments away from annihilation.
And Moses' response to this is basically a masterclass in the physical toll of intercession.
He puts his body on the line.
He doesn't just ask God to calm down. He takes the 2 tablets of stone, which are the literal physical manifestation of the treaty, and he smashes them.
Which is a profound legal maneuver, really. By shattering the tablets, he's legally nullifying the broken covenant so the people can't be prosecuted under it. If the treaty is broken, they can't be destroyed for violating its terms.
That is wild. I never thought about it as a legal defense.
It's brilliant. And then he throws himself face down. The text says he lay before the Lord for 40 days and 40 nights, fasting completely, neither eating bread nor drinking water.
He used his own physical body as a shield to halt their destruction.
It was an extreme, exhausting exertion of that daysman role we discussed earlier.
So when Moses looks at this new generation standing on the edge of Canaan, he is deliberately stripping away every ounce of their meritocracy.
Every single bit of it. He is saying, don't you dare think you earn this prosperity. The only reason you even exist as a people right now is because of a radical, unmerited, and exhausting intervention by someone else.
You are at your core a stiff-necked, rebellious people who survived purely on grace.
Exactly. And this tackles one of the deepest universal struggles in human philosophy, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The tension between a merit-based worldview and a grace-based worldview.
Right, because our modern world operates almost exclusively on a strict meritocracy.
The fundamental assumption is always that you get what you earn. If you work hard, if you make smart choices, you succeed. If you fail, It is entirely your fault.
And that operating system works reasonably well for, running a corporation or a supply chain.
Yeah.
But it is absolutely disastrous when applied to the human soul.
Disastrous is the right word. When we apply meritocracy to our moral and social lives, it breeds intense contempt.
Yes, it really does.
Because if I believe my comfortable life, my stable family, and my clean criminal record are solely the result of my superior character and excellent decision-making, well, I will inevitably look down on those whose lives are in shambles.
You will view the addict, the bankrupt, or the incarcerated with disgust. You'll assume their suffering is just the universe paying out what their inferior character earned.
But this ancient text introduces a completely radical paradigm that just shatters that contempt.
It insists that your survival, your blessings, and your good life are often granted to you, despite your profound flaws, not because of them.
It insists that you are the beneficiary of unseen interventions.
And the practical application of this grace-based paradigm is radical grounding empathy.
Because when Moses forces them to remember the golden calf, he is giving them a tool for their own humanity.
Yes, a tool for keeping their ego in check.
When we remember our own golden calf moments, the times we failed spectacularly, the times we lied to save our own skin, the times we acted out of deep selfishness and managed to narrowly avoid the disastrous consequences we absolutely deserved.
It changes how we view others completely.
Remembering the grace we received prevents us from looking at the failures of others from a tower of moral superiority.
So use the memory of your own spared consequences to ground your empathy for the person currently suffering theirs.
But that call for empathy creates massive friction when we move into the most difficult, uncomfortable, and frankly jawing parts of Deuteronomy.
Yes, we have to talk about the external commands.
Right. We've explored the internal postures of humility and gratitude. But how does this text instruct them to interact with the external world, specifically the actual historical nations currently occupying Canaan?
This brings us to chapters 7 and 10, and we have to face the hardest text of all, the mandate for holy war.
It is the absolute elephant in the room of ancient Near Eastern texts. Chapter 7 commands the Israelites to utterly destroy 7 specific nations.
The Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, and others.
And the language is uncompromising. Show them no mercy, make no covenants with them, and absolutely do not intermarry with them.
It commands them to smash their altars, break their pillars, and burn their carved images with fire.
I'll just say what every modern reader is thinking right now. This sounds like the antithesis of everything we value today regarding tolerance, coexistence, and human rights. It literally reads like a manifesto for religious genocide.
It should be deeply jarring to the modern ear. If it doesn't bother you, you aren't reading it closely enough.
So how on earth do we extract enduring wisdom from a text that endorses the total eradication of neighboring cultures?
This is where we must apply critical historical discernment and rely heavily on the analytical boundaries drawn by our sources.
Okay, what did the commentators say?
Matthew Henry explicitly and forcefully notes that this severe commission was confined strictly to these specific 7 nations at that specific historical moment.
So it wasn't a universal rule of engagement.
Not at all. Henry writes unequivocally that this was not to be drawn into a precedent for after ages. This text is not, and never was intended to be, a blank check for religious violence or imperialism in the modern world.
So the obvious question is, why those specific nations, and why at that exact time? What was the historical mechanism that required such extreme measures?
We have to understand the existential threat of assimilation into Canaanite culture. This wasn't just a disagreement over theological nomenclature or, different styles of worship.
Right. It wasn't just a different flavor of spirituality.
No, the religious practices of these nations were built on horrific systemic abuses. We are talking about the worship of deities like Molech, which involved institutionalized child sacrifice.
Child sacrifice.
Yes. Literally heating a bronze statue and placing living infants into its hands to secure agricultural prosperity.
That is horrific.
It involved institutionalized temple prostitution and the total commodification of human life. The commentator Albert Barnes notes that God uses disease and war as his instruments of historical judgment. And the text repeatedly states that the iniquity of these nations was full.
Meaning their society had reached a terminal velocity of moral decay.
Exactly. They were past the point of return.
I see. So the mandate to not intermarry and to smash the altars wasn't about ethnic purity. It was about ideological quarantine.
Ideological quarantine is the perfect phrase for it.
Because if the Israelites, who we just saw, were incredibly susceptible to idolatry with the golden calf, if they walked into this culture and assimilated, intermarrying and adopting their economic and religious practices, the unique monotheistic witness of Israel would be annihilated.
It would have vanished within a generation.
The revolutionary concept of a God who demands justice, protects the vulnerable, and values human life above agricultural output would be extinguished from human history before it even took root.
Precisely. The destruction of the altars and the burning of the silver and gold idols so they wouldn't become a snare was about excising a societal cancer. It was a localized, historical, scorched earth quarantine protocol to ensure the survival of the covenant.
It's an extreme historical containment strategy. And the proof that this was a localized boundary rather than the ultimate character of the divine is found just a few chapters later in chapter 10.
Yes, the pivot here is breathtaking.
It really is. Contrast the violent boundaries of chapter 7 with the enduring universal wisdom revealed in chapter 10 regarding what the ultimate creator actually values.
In chapter 10, God commands them to circumcise the foreskin of your heart.
That's a vivid metaphor.
It's a physical metaphor for cutting away the internal callousness, the stubborn, unyielding tissue of the ego that blocks true devotion and empathy.
And then Moses describes God not as an ultimate warrior, but as the supreme judge who executes justice for the fatherless and widow and loves the foreigner in giving him food and clothing.
And from that description of the divine character flows the mandate that completely subverts the ancient world's tribalism. Therefore, love the foreigner, for you were foreigners in the land of Egypt.
It is the ultimate paradox of strict internal boundaries and radical external love.
Exactly.
So if we translate this dual mandate to our modern reality, the holy war metaphor applies strictly and exclusively to our internal lives.
It is about internal ruthlessness. When the text commands them to burn the idols and not covet the silver and gold on them because it's an abomination, we have to interrogate our own lives.
What are the modern toxic habits, right?
Yes. The abominations we have allowed into our minds and homes. What are the silver and gold idols we absolutely refuse to smash?
It could be a relentless obsession with wealth that just ignores all ethics, or a destructive addiction we keep making excuses for.
Or a deeply toxic relationship. Or even just the constant, soul-crushing drumbeat of comparison on social media.
You cannot negotiate a peace treaty with the things that are actively destroying your soul.
No, you can't.
You cannot intermarry with your worst vices and expect to maintain your integrity. You have to draw a scorched earth, uncompromising boundary and show those internal enemies no mercy. You burn the idol and you don't keep the gold it was made of.
But simultaneously, in your external interactions with actual human beings, the mandate is radical, self-giving empathy.
Love the foreigner, for you were foreigners in Egypt.
It is a brilliant psychological pivot by Moses. He takes their deepest historical trauma, the brutal, multi-generational slavery in Egypt, and instead of allowing it to curdle into a victim complex or an excuse for preemptive violence against outsiders,
he transforms the trauma into a mandate for compassion.
Your past pain must become your present empathy.
Because you know exactly what the sting of the whip feels like. You know what it feels like to be an outsider, to be marginalized, to be entirely vulnerable to the whims of a powerful majority.
Therefore, because you suffered, you are uniquely qualified and uniquely obligated to ensure others do not suffer that same fate.
This tension between fierce internal discipline and expansive external compassion sets the stage perfectly for the climax of Moses' address.
We are finally at chapter 11.
Having laid out the history, the grace, the warnings, and the rules, he presents the ultimate choice. And he grounds this choice not in abstract philosophy, but in the very dirt and geography of the land they are about to possess.
This geographical metaphor is brilliant. Moses forces them to compare the fundamental agricultural mechanisms of Egypt, the place they escaped, with Canaan, the place they're entering.
Let's look at the mechanics of Egyptian agriculture first.
Barnes' commentary provides excellent historical detail here. Egypt's agriculture was entirely defined by the Nile River.
Right, it was extremely predictable.
Very predictable. It was a system heavily dependent on human engineering and human labor. The text says in Egypt, you sowed your seed and watered it with your feet.
Watered it with your feet, what does that mean?
This refers to the use of treadmills, foot pumps, and the manual labor required to open and close the complex network of irrigation canals.
Oh, I see. It was a closed loop of human effort.
Exactly. You build the canal, you walk the treadmill, you pump the water, you grow the crop.
It's an atheistic ecology. It is predictable, controllable, and completely reliant on human capital. You don't have to trust the sky. You just have to trust your own sweat and your own engineering.
But Canaan operates on a completely different ecological paradigm.
Moses tells them, "The land that you go over to possess is a land of hills and valleys which drinks water from the rain of the sky."
Canaan doesn't have a Nile. You cannot build a better foot pump to guarantee a harvest.
You are entirely, terrifyingly dependent on atmospheric pressure systems you cannot control, specifically what the text calls the former and the latter rain.
The existential dread of switching from a closed-loop engineering system to an open-loop rain system is massive. Canaan represents a life of daily, unmitigated vulnerability and dependence on the divine.
You cannot micromanage the rain.
No, you can't. You cannot engineer your way out of the need for grace.
But because of this inherent dependency, Moses adds a profound, beautiful caveat. He says it is a land which the Lord your God cares for. The eyes of the Lord your God are always upon it.
The absolute dependency is the very thing that guarantees the relational connection.
If we are honest with ourselves, modern humans desperately want the Egypt life.
Oh, without a doubt.
We spend our entire lives trying to build a reality where we can engineer our own security. We want enough money in the bank, enough insurance policies, and enough leverage in our careers that we can rely purely on our own foot power.
We want outcomes we can dictate. We absolutely despise the feeling of waiting for the rain.
Because waiting requires giving up the illusion of control. We crave autonomy above all else.
But Moses is suggesting that the deeper, more meaningful life, the actual promised land, is the Canaan life.
It requires acknowledging that our control is largely an illusion anyway, doesn't it?
Yes, it is. It's the choice between living in a closed, self-reliant, anxiety-ridden loop, where the entire weight of your survival depends on your own exhaustion, or living in an open, trust-based relationship with the universe.
Accepting your vulnerability, but trusting in ultimate provision.
And to make this choice physical and unforgettable, Moses commands a dramatic ceremony.
Right. He tells them that when they finally cross the Jordan, they are to place the blessing on Mount Gerizim and the curse on Mount Ebal.
These are two actual massive mountains dominating the landscape of the new land. Mount Gerizim, the mountain of blessing, stood to the south, geographically associated with the sun, light, and flourishing life.
And Mount Ebal to the north was the mountain of the curse.
Moses is creating a permanent, geographical monument to human agency and free will. He is telling them, I set before you today a blessing and a curse. The blessing follows obedience to the covenant. The curse follows the turning away to other gods.
The reality is that every single day, you stand in the valley between Gerizim and Ebal. You stand between the mountain of blessing and the mountain of the curse.
And the choice isn't about performing ancient rituals. It's about the core psychological and spiritual principles Moses has laid out.
Choosing the path of blessing means choosing humility over ego. It means practicing intentional gratitude when you are completely full.
It means ruthlessly dismantling your own moral superiority.
Right. It means drawing scorched earth boundaries against your toxic habits while extending radical, trauma-informed empathy to the outsider. That path brings the blessing of a deeply meaningful, connected, and resilient life.
And the alternative, turning away to worship the modern other gods of wealth, status, absolute control, and self-reliance, inevitably brings the curse.
And it's not a magical curse. It is the natural consequence of isolation.
Exactly. Yeah. It brings spiritual drought and the crushing exhaustion of trying to be your own provider, your own daysman, and your own savior. Moses is pleading with this new generation across every chapter. Choose the vulnerability of Canaan over the slavery of Egypt. Choose life.
Choose to trust the rain, which leaves us with a final provocative thought from chapter 11 to carry with you. Moses says that because the land depends entirely on the rain, God's eyes are on it from the beginning of the year even to the end of the year.
That is a beautiful image.
Think deeply about what it means to live a life under that kind of constant, unbroken gaze of care. Even when you are in the middle of a dry season, anxiously waiting for the latter rain to fall. Even when you feel incredibly vulnerable and entirely out of control of your circumstances, you are not unobserved. You are not forgotten. In this ancient survival manual for prosperity, the ultimate tool for survival is realizing that you are never actually surviving on your own to begin with.
That is incredibly profound.
That's the heart of this section. This is wisdom for the present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.